I was sitting on the couch, watching a quiet documentary, when my son-in-law stormed in and ripped the cable straight out of the TV. He looked at me and said, "Enough of this garbage. In this house, we watch things with a little substance." What hurt the most wasn't even his words. It was my daughter standing right behind him. After living under my roof for 18 months, she didn't even try to stand up for me. She just looked away, nodding in agreement with her husband. I didn't say a single word. I quietly got up and went upstairs, making a definitive choice that very night. The next morning, as soon as they left for work, I called someone over to the house. Someone who was going to change everything. By the time they returned, they would be outside, shouting and pounding desperately on the door. Welcome to a story of family betrayal and a reckoning. This is the point where my patience ended and the real story began. It was a Friday afternoon in October, and everything felt completely ordinary until it wasn't. My name is Joe Brennan. I'm 67 years old, and I'm a retired investigative journalist. According to the deed inside my filing cabinet, I am the sole owner of this property, though you'd never know it by looking at the way I was living. I had become a ghost in my own home, seen but not heard, present but entirely unacknowledged. I was treated like a piece of old furniture that people just walk around on their way to something more important. My wife, Catherine, passed away 5 years ago, and when she left, the warmth of this house went with her. 18 months ago, my daughter, Kingsley, and her husband, Jason, moved in after losing their apartment. I opened my doors to them, because that's what a father does. We protect our children, even when they're 38 years old, and even when they're married to men we don't particularly care for. That Friday afternoon, I was sitting in my leather recliner, the one Catherine and I bought back in 1998, watching a historical documentary. The autumn sun was hitting the window at that perfect golden angle. I was completely engrossed in the program when I heard the footsteps. Jason's footsteps. They were heavy and aggressive, announcing his presence long before he actually walked into the room. At 4:30 p.m., he loomed over the doorway like a dark cloud. Jason Caldwell, 40 years old, a self-proclaimed real estate agent, though I had never actually seen evidence of him like a single listing. He was wearing an expensive shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Enough of this garbage," he announced, not as a request, but as an order. "This house needs a higher standard." I looked up from the screen. "Do me a favor and turn off this junk you watch all day," he said, gesturing dismissively at the television. "It drags down the entire atmosphere of the house. We need to do better than this, Joe." Notice he called me Joe. Not Dad, not Mr. Brennan. Just Joe, as if we were buddies, as if he had any right to come into my living room and make demands. "It's a historical documentary," I said calmly. 42 years in journalism taught me to keep my voice steady whenever I felt like shouting. "It's educational. Just accounts of the past." He took 3 long strides across the room. "We are establishing a more refined atmosphere in this home." I should have seen it coming. I should have recognized that look in his eyes. That toxic mix of contempt and arrogance I'd seen in dozens of bad actors I exposed during my career. But this was my home, my sanctuary. Jason stepped behind the TV, grabbed the cable, and yanked it with everything he had. The plastic connector snapped. The screen flashed, went to static, and then went completely black. The narrator's voice was cut off mid-sentence, leaving an eerie silence in the room. "There," he said, holding up the broken cable like a trophy. Much better. Now maybe you can spend your time on something worthwhile instead of just sitting here. I sat there frozen, the remote control still in my hand, completely useless now. Just a piece of plastic pointing at a dead screen. We'll discuss more appropriate entertainment options over dinner, he called back as he walked away. Kingsley and I want to bring this household into the modern era. The front door opened at 6:15 p.m. It was Kingsley's car. Her footsteps on the porch sounded exhausted and cautious, like someone who had just finished a 12-hour hospital shift. She's a nurse, and a good one. I heard her bag drop to the floor, and I heard her greeting Jason in the kitchen. I caught the low murmur of his voice, undoubtedly twisting the story of the cable to make himself look like the responsible one. 5 minutes later, she appeared in the doorway, still in her scrubs. "Hey, Dad." The words felt entirely mechanical. A social obligation rather than a genuine connection. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything, I still loved her. She looked at the blank TV screen, then at the broken cable on the table, and finally at me. I waited. I waited for her to ask what happened. I waited for her to take my side. I waited for some sign that the little girl I raised, the one who stood up to bullies in the 3rd grade, was still in there somewhere. "Dad," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Mom would be so ashamed of how you waste your time. Jason is right. The environment in this house needs a serious upgrade. We all need to do better." She walked away without waiting for my response. Likely, heading back to congratulate her husband for being brave enough to manage the old man. I sat there as the autumn light faded into twilight, watching the streetlights flicker on outside. I held that broken cable, feeling the jagged plastic edges digging into my palm. 7 o'clock came and went. The house was filled with the sounds of Jason and Kingsley making dinner together, laughing at something on their phones, living their lives in my home as if I weren't even there, as if I were just an old piece of furniture waiting to be hauled away. I looked at the dead cable in my hand, and then I looked around at the walls. The walls Catherine and I had painted, the floors we had refinished, the windows we chose together, the life we built. Right then, I felt a profound shift deep inside my chest. It felt like a lock turning, like something that had been asleep for 18 months was suddenly wide awake. I spent 4 decades as an investigative journalist. I've exposed corrupt politicians, fraudulent corporations, and scammers who thought they were smarter than everyone else. My entire career was built on patience, documentation, and hard evidence. Knowing exactly when to observe, when to wait, and when to strike. For 18 months, I had been observing and waiting, watching Jason take over my home, watching Kingsley drift away, watching myself disappear into a series of small humiliations. The observation phase was officially over. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting but holding firm. I walked to my bedroom, the only space they hadn't taken over, and pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer, the exact kind I used for every investigation. At the top of the page, I wrote the date and noted the cable incident. Beneath it, I started listing everything I had noticed over the months, but had been too tired, too sad, or too passive to act on. The strange charges on my credit cards, the whispered phone calls, the way Jason looked at my belongings, silently calculating their value when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that broken cable and heard Kingsley taking his side. By 11 p.m., I stopped, pretending I could rest. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, until a thought pierced through the fog with absolute clarity. Stop being the victim. Start being the journalist. The shift felt physical. The shift felt physical, like throwing a switch that hadn't been touched in years. Ever since Catherine died, grief had made me soft and passive, grateful for even the slightest bit of attention from my daughter. At some point, I had traded my self-respect for the mere illusion of family closeness. Tonight, that trade-off ended. At 11:30 p.m., voices drifted through the wall. Jason and Kingsley's bedroom shared a wall with mine, an arrangement that felt more invasive by the day. I couldn't make out the exact words, just his low, controlling tone and her occasional responses. They were planning something, likely regarding me. Probably discussing how to manage the old man now that they had drawn a line in the sand. Let them talk. While they were planning, I was going to act. At midnight, I made my move. I slid out of bed, threw on the flannel robe Catherine gave me for our last Christmas together, and stepped into the hallway in my socks. The house was completely dark, save for a thin sliver of light under their door. I stopped and listened. Total silence. They were either asleep or winding down. I moved with a stealth I hadn't used in years. Slowly, deliberately, tapping into the old instincts forged during late-night stakeouts and deep investigations. I kept my balance, remembering exactly which floorboards creaked, choosing patience over haste. It's funny how muscle memory works. My former study, which Jason had claimed as his office, was at the end of the hall. The door wasn't locked. Why would it be? In Jason's world, I was completely harmless. Just a retired senior citizen who watched TV and made quiet complaints. Someone you could easily sideline while draining his life, his home, and his authority. At 1:00 a.m. I turned the doorknob. The room no longer smelled of books and polish. It reeked of cheap cologne and energy drinks. My old desk was buried under fast food wrappers and scattered papers, and there, glowing faintly in sleep mode, was his laptop. I sat in my old chair and tapped the trackpad. The screen lit up instantly. No password required, no hesitation. I almost laughed out loud. For 42 years, I ran a career on discipline and evidence. Yet Jason Caldwell sat here, completely convinced that I was too broken to notice anything. How had I missed all of this? Grief, loneliness, the fear of losing my daughter. I had swallowed my pride just to keep my family close, paying for it with my dignity. That debt was coming due tonight. I started with the browser history, luxury brands, restaurants I could never afford. Then the emails, all completely logged in. Financial apps, synced text messages. The sheer arrogance of it was staggering. I pulled out my phone and methodically took photos of everything. My hands were perfectly steady. It wasn't anger fueling me. It was total clarity. It was pure muscle memory. By 2 a.m., I found the credit card statements. My credit cards, the ones I hadn't used in months, tucked away in my wallet strictly for emergencies, Heavleys. According to these statements, I was living an incredibly lavish lifestyle. $900 dinners, $3,000 shopping sprees, charges for luxury wellness spas, high-end electronics I'd never seen, and bookings for weekend resorts I couldn't even pronounce. The charges spanned over 6 months, statement after statement. Every signature looked remarkably like mine. But it wasn't right. It was a decent imitation to a casual observer, but nowhere near good enough to fool the man who had been signing his own name for 67 years. 47 $1,000. In the span of half a year, My son of half-in-law had taken $47,000 from me, and he left a complete digital trail of every single dime. I photographed every page, every forged signature, and every single unauthorized charge. 43 photos in total. 43 quiet clicks that would seal his fate. At 2:20 a.m., my blood ran cold. A door opened down the hall. Footsteps. Jason was heading toward the bathroom. I quickly closed everything out, returning the desktop exactly to how I found it and putting the laptop back to sleep. The footsteps grew louder. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bathroom door closed, and the water started running. I slipped out into the hallway and moved silently back to my room. Behind me, the bathroom door opened again, and Jason padded back to bed. I closed my door and sat on the edge of my mattress. By 2:30 a.m., I was gripping my phone, the adrenaline finally catching up to me. I waited until I was absolutely certain he was back asleep. My hands were shaking now, but the evidence was safe on my phone. Yet, financial fraud wasn't even the worst thing on that laptop. I had caught a glimpse of email subject lines that turned my stomach. Those could wait. I had already taken enough risks for one night. I scrolled through the photos again, clear, legible, and absolutely undeniable. I spent decades chasing the truth, and tonight, the truth had landed right in my lap. I should have gone to sleep. The credit card evidence was more than enough, but my thumb kept scrolling through the photos anyway. That's when I saw it. An email thread I had captured almost entirely by accident. The subject line read, "Regarding Joseph Brennan. Long-term care options." My heart sank. I pinched the screen to zoom in. It was a conversation between Jason and a woman named Susan Whitfield, a senior living consultant at the Dawn Meadow Memory Care Facility. Memory care. They were looking into memory care for me. The first email was dated August 15th, 3 months ago. Jason's message was brief. "Hi, Susan. Thanks for taking my call yesterday. I'm looking into options for placing an elderly relative. He's becoming increasingly difficult to manage at home. What does the admission process look like?" An elderly relative. Difficult to manage. As if I were a problem to be solved, rather than the owner of the house he was living in. Susan's response came 3 days later, professional and clinical. "We understand how challenging it can be when a family member shows signs of cognitive decline. Our facility requires documented evidence of this decline, along with family consensus for professional care. We will need medical evaluations, proof of an inability to maintain independent living, and either the individual's consent or a legal power of attorney. I am 67 years old, and my mind is sharper than it was at 40. But Jason was actively manufacturing a case to prove I was losing my sanity. The email from September 10th made my hands shake. Jason wrote, "The old man is stubborn, but the signs are there. Confusion with dates, repeating himself, occasional disorientation. My wife agrees that he needs professional care. We're both worried about his safety. What paperwork do you need from us?" Lies. Every single word was a complete fabrication. I had never been confused or disoriented. As a calculated, urged narrative designed to store me away like cargo while I was still alive. Also, he could liquidate my asset. He even claimed Kingsley agreed. My own daughter, who promised at her mother's funeral that she would always look after me, had apparently signed off on having me declared incompetent. Unless he was lying about her involvement too. Susan's reply outlined the exact roadmap. A doctor's evaluation to document the decline. establishing a power of attorney while the patient still had the nominal capacity to sign it, and then the final admission paperwork. Jason had been laying the groundwork, likely searching for a corruptible medical professional, willing to sign off on a false diagnosis, and preparing power of attorney documents, hoping I would sign them without looking closely. The final email, dated September 28th, was the most devastating. Jason wrote, "Attached is the initial application with his information. Once Joseph is safely placed under your care and the power of attorney is transferred, the house can be sold within 90 days. Market value is around $800,000. After facility fees, there should be a substantial amount left to manage his ongoing care. $800,000. My house. The home Catherine and I bought back in 1983 for $62,000. The house we painted together, where we raised Kingsley, and where we built our entire lives. To Jason, it was just an asset to be liquidated, and I was simply an obstacle to be removed." I zoomed in on the attached PDF. It was the Dawn Meadow application form. It was the Dawn typed across in form, with my full name typed across the top. Joseph Robert Brennan. My date of birth and my social security number were all filled out without my knowledge or consent. I looked at the photo of Catherine on my nightstand. It was taken on our 30th anniversary, a year before she got sick. She was laughing, her eyes bright and full of life. "Kate," I whispered, "I wish you were here. You always knew when I was being too soft, when I was being too trusting." But she was gone, and I was left to handle this alone. I had let grief and loneliness cloud my judgment, letting Jason into my home because I couldn't bear the thought of being completely estranged from Kingsley. At 2:45 a.m., I connected my phone to my laptop and created a secured folder. I began copying the files from my phone to my hard drive and then to a USB flash drive. Redundancy. Multiple backups. It was the very first lesson you learn as a journalist. By 3 a.m., I had 3 complete copies of everything. $47,000 in financial fraud. A conspiracy to have me declared incompetent and committed to a facility. A plan to sell my home and force me to spend the rest of my days in a place I never agreed to go. I held that tiny USB drive in my hand, knowing it contained more than enough evidence to dismantle Jason's life. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and conspiracy. The cable incident hadn't just been about the television. It was about cutting me off from everything, my autonomy, my home, and my dignity. Jason had been eroding my presence bit by bit, preparing to make me disappear entirely. But he made one fatal mistake. He looked at a 67-year-old widower and saw nothing but weakness. He saw someone who could be manipulated and discarded, completely forgetting that this exact man spent 42 years hunting down people just like him. People who thought they were smarter than everyone else. People who thought they could get away with anything. I've exposed corrupt politicians, fraudulent companies, and swindlers. My entire career was built on patience, documentation, and hard facts. I never lost a story, and as long as I had the evidence, I never let a guilty person walk away. The observation was officially over. The evidence was secured. Tomorrow, or rather today, since it was technically Saturday morning, the real work would begin. I tucked the USB drive safely into my desk drawer, plugged my phone into its charger, and finally lay down. This time, exhaustion pulled me under almost instantly. It wasn't the restless, broken sleep of the past 18 months. It was the deep, restorative rest of a man who knew exactly what battle he was fighting, and precisely how he was going to win it. At 5 a.m., I woke up without an alarm. 2 hours of sleep should have left me exhausted. But adrenaline is an incredibly powerful stimulant. I lay there, staring at the ceiling for about 30 seconds, as the sheer weight of what I had discovered came rushing right back to me. $47,000. A calculated plot to put me away in a facility. And my own daughter could very well be a part of it. I got out of bed and looked at my desk, which was exactly as I'd left it. The USB drive sat right next to Catherine's wedding photo, like a protective charm. I pulled out a brand new yellow legal pad, the old school kind with the green lines, and uncapped my pen. Some things never change. Even in the age of laptops and smartphones, I've always found that I think much clearer with a pen and a piece of paper. At the very top of the page, I wrote, October 19, 2025. Action Plan. Beneath it, I mapped out a definitive checklist: locksmith, lawyer, bank, evidence organization, and exit strategy. Every single item represented a concrete step toward reclaiming my life. Each move required absolute precision, perfect timing, and the kind of strategic thinking I had sharpened over 40 years in investigative journalism. This was no longer just about gathering information. This was about execution, about knowing exactly when and how to deploy what I had uncovered. I stared at the list, my eyes lingering on the word lawyer. I needed someone I could trust implicitly. Someone who knew me well enough to believe the story without questioning my mental capacity. Tis. I couldn't risk taking this to someone who would look at a 67-year-old man, claiming his son-in-law was trying to commit him to an institution, and wonder if the old man was actually losing his mind. Only one name made sense. At 5:30 a.m., I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had kept memorized for 40 years. Charles Norton answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. This better be good, Joe. Do you know what time it is? Charles, it's Joe Brennan. I need your help. The annoyance in his voice vanished instantly. Charles and I went back to 1985, when we were both young, reckless, and working together to expose a city councilman taking kickbacks from a construction firm. He was the legal mastermind who helped me navigate the complexities of proving systemic corruption, and I was the reporter who knew how to dig up the truth and lock it down. We used to be one hell of a team. What's going on? Are you okay? Physically, I'm fine. But I need a lawyer, Charles. This is a case of elder abuse. I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. And I'm the victim. Silence stretched over the line before he finally spoke. Are you serious, Joe? Completely serious. Right here in my own home. I heard the sound of rustling sheets as he sat up in bed. Tell me everything. So I laid it all out for him. Short, sharp, and straight to the point. I told him about Jason and Kingsley living with me for 18 months, the cable incident, and my late-night investigation. I told him about the financial fraud, $47,000 drained over six months, and the emails to Susan Whitfield detailing the plan to place me in memory care and liquidate my home. Charles listened without a single interruption, the sound of his steady breathing, the only proof he was still on the line. When I finished, the silence lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Charles? I'm here. He let out a long, heavy breath. Joe, this is incredibly serious. We're looking at financial elder abuse, identity theft, and grand larceny. If you have the documentation to back this up, Jason is looking at 5 to 10 years. I have the documentation, every single photo, the bank statements, the emails, the entire timeline laid out in his own words. And what about your daughter? How deep is Kingsley in this? That question cut deeper than anything else. I don't know. Jason claims she agreed that I need professional care. Whether that's true or if he's manipulating her too, I honestly can't tell yet. All right. Charles's voice shifted into pure professional mode, a tone I knew intimately from our decades of working together. First rule, do not confront them. Not yet. We need to secure everything legally before they suspect a thing. Can you be at my office Monday morning at 9? I'll be there. Good. Between now and then, I need you to duplicate every single piece of evidence. Cloud storage, physical drives, whatever you have to do. Send an encrypted set directly to my email. And Joe, do not delete or alter anything on his laptop. We need to preserve the chain of custody. I'm already way ahead of you on the copies, cloud, laptop, and physical drives. I heard a faint chuckle on the other end. You haven't lost your touch, old friend. Good. We're going to need it. After we hung up, about to kick out, additional. I spent the next hour creating additional backups, uploading everything to a secure cloud server, making a second physical drive to hide in a completely different location, and sending the encrypted files over to Charles. By 7 a.m., I had 6 complete copies of the evidence stored in various secure places. Total redundancy. Even if Jason somehow discovered what I was doing and managed to destroy the original files, I still held everything required to guarantee his legal undoing. I picked up the wedding photo from my desk. Catherine was radiant in her white gown, and I was wearing a slightly ill-fitting rented tuxedo. 1982 felt like a lifetime ago. She was 26 then, and I was 39. People used to say we were an unlikely match. She was so vibrant and full of energy, while I was already set in my rigid, investigative ways. But she understood me like no one else ever could. You always told me I let people walk all over me, Kate, I whispered to the frame. You used to get so frustrated when I chose to avoid conflict instead of standing my ground. Remember when my editor tried to kill that corruption piece? You told me you'd never forgive me if I backed down. I had published that story. It took 6 months of political warfare and nearly cost me my career. But it brought the truth to light, and Catherine had been so incredibly proud of me. After you left, I backed down a lot. I let Jason take over because fighting just felt too hard. I let Kingsley drift away because I was terrified of losing her completely. You would have been so disappointed in me. I gently set the photo back down. But not anymore. Watch me handle this, sweetheart. This time, it's for both of us. At 8 a.m., I heard movement upstairs. The running water, the heavy footsteps. Jason and Kingsley were starting their Saturday morning, as if the cable incident meant absolutely nothing. As if they hadn't spent months plotting to ruin me financially and lock me away. I sat at my desk with the legal pad in front of me, the evidence locked down in multiple locations, a lawyer on my side, and a clear strategy taking shape. Jason thought he was dealing with a confused, harmless old man who could be pushed around until he disappeared. By Monday morning, he was going to realize just how disastrously wrong he was. I spent 42 years taking down people who thought they were untouchable, and Jason Caldwell was about to find out he was just another name on a very long list. By Monday morning at 7:45 a.m., the sound of Jason's truck backing out of the driveway felt entirely different, sharper, definitive, like the beginning of the end. 5 minutes later, Kingsley's sedan followed, her tires crunching over the crisp October leaves scattering our street. I watched from the upstairs window until both vehicles turned the corner and vanished from sight. Then, I reached for my phone. Valdez Locksmith, this is Tony. Tony. It's Joe Brennan over on Maple Avenue. I need to change every single lock on my house today. Every single entrance. There was a brief pause on the line. Tony Valdez had been running his business in our neighborhood for 30 years. He had rekeyed my house back in 2003 when we lost a set of keys at the grocery store. Catherine had been with me that day. And we spent hours laughing about how we turned the car completely upside down looking for them. What's the earliest I can get out there, Joe? Does 9 o'clock work? I'll be waiting. Do you have high-security deadbolts on hand? Absolutely. The best commercial grade available. Another pause, shorter this time. Tony was a professional. He knew exactly when not to ask questions. Understood. See you at 9. I hung up and checked my watch. 1 hour and 15 minutes remained until the first lock would turn, marking the exact moment the first square inch of my home would officially belong to me again. I spent that hour moving through the house like a shadow, cataloging every single threshold that was about to be secured. The front door, where Jason had stood holding that broken cable just days ago. The back door, where he had started parking his truck so close it practically blocked me in. The garage door, the basement entrance. 4 points of entry they had used entirely at their own whim, treating my home as if it belonged to them. At 8:55 a.m., Tony's white van pulled into the driveway. I opened the door to greet him before he could even knock. "Morning, Joe," he said, carrying 2 heavy toolboxes with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Professional, efficient, ready to work. "We'll start with the front door and work our way around," I told him. "Lead the way." He set down his gear and pulled out a heavy-duty drill. "This won't take long at all. High-security deadbolts, thumb turns on the inside, keyed on the outside. You'll get 5 sets of keys for each lock." 5 sets. I hadn't thought about that. 5 sets meant total control. It meant I alone would decide who crossed my threshold and who stayed out. At 9:15 a.m., the drill bit into the old metal lock. The sound shattered 18 months of quiet submission, of tiptoeing around my own home, of pretending I couldn't hear them planning my future in the next room. Metal shavings fell onto the porch like bright silver snow. Tony worked with the ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times, his hands incredibly steady and confident. "There we go," he said, as the old deadbolt came free with a sharp metallic clatter. This one was well past its prime anyway. I took the old mechanism in my palm. It was still warm from the friction of the drill, the brass worn smooth in places. How many times had Jason's key turned this exact cylinder? How many times had they walked right through my door, without knocking, without asking, completely disregarding my boundaries? "Get rid of it, please." He tossed it into his bucket with a deeply satisfying clang, then reached for the new lock. This one was heavy, solid, and finished in sleek chrome. When he installed it and handed me the very first key, it felt like holding a tangible piece of my own dignity. "Give it a try." I slid the key into the cylinder. It turned as smooth as butter. Click, the deadbolt threw home. Click, it retracted perfectly. I tested it 4 times, feeling the absolute precision of the new mechanism, absorbing the quiet promise of security. "Back door next," I said. And silence. We moved silently through the house. By 9:45 a.m., the drill was singing its metallic song at the back entrance. The exact same process unfolded. Old lock out, new lock in. Tony's efficiency was born from decades of experience, entirely free of wasted motion or emotion. By 10:45 a.m., as we finished up at the basement door, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in 18 months. It wasn't complete freedom just yet, but rather the undeniable possibility of it. Every new lock was a barrier, yes, but more importantly, it represented a choice. My choice. The power to decide exactly who was allowed into my space and who was permanently excluded. "That's the last of them," Tony said, wiping his hands with a shop rag as he began packing up his tools. 4 high-security deadbolts, 20 keys total. 5 for each door. Keep them separated, and maybe give a set to someone you trust implicitly. I immediately thought of Charles Norton. 1 set for him, 1 for my personal safe, 1 hidden securely inside the house, 1 for my car, and 1 right in my pocket. "What do I owe you, Tony?" He named the figure. I pulled out my wallet and added 2 extra $100 bills to the total. "For your promptness and your discretion." Tony looked at the extra cash, then looked up at me. A faint look of complete understanding crossed his face. He had been in this business long enough to know that not every lock change is because of a misplaced ring of keys. "Take care of yourself, Joe," he said, pocketing the money and extending a hand. His grip was firm and strong, the handshake of a man who understood that some jobs are about much more than just hardware. I walked him out to his van, closing my newly secured door behind him, and watched him drive away. Then I turned back to the quiet house and tested every single lock one more time. Front door, click. Back door, click. Garage, click. Basement, click. 4 locks. 20 keys. For the first time in 18 months, a genuine smile crossed my face. By 11:30 a.m., Tony's van was long gone, and I had 4 brand new keys riding securely in my pocket. But locking Jason and Kingsley out physically was only half the battle. Securing my home legally required a completely different kind of setup. Something every investigative reporter knows exactly how to build a war room. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at the space with entirely fresh eyes. For 18 months, this room had been my only refuge. Now it was about to transform into something Catherine would have recognized instantly from the old days. The birthplace of a major story that needed to be dismantled piece by piece. First came the desk. I cleared off every single item. The lamp, the books, the framed photo of Catherine and me at Niagara Falls. Everything was moved to the dresser. The desk surface needed to be completely bare, ready for systematic organization. Then I pulled out the yellow legal pad where I had started my notes on Friday night. I brought up the photos of the credit card statements and the screenshots of the emails between Jason and Susan Whitfield. 43 images in total, securely backed up in 6 different locations. It was time to make them tell a story. I spent 42 years at the Chicago Tribune, specializing in making evidence talk. This was no different, only infinitely more personal. I started with the wall right above the desk, condensing 18 months of my life into a strict timeline written on index cards. April 2024. Jason and Kingsley move in, claiming it's entirely temporary. June 2024. The first unauthorized charge appears. An $890 dinner at a high-end steakhouse. August 2024. Jason begins complaining that I'm wasting utilities. October 2024. I catch him going through my mail. He laughs it off. February 2025. The emails to Susan Whitfield begin, inquiring about long-term placement for an elderly relative. September 2025, Susan sends the Dawn Meadow brochure, and the application is filled out with my forged signature. October 18, 2025. Jason cuts the TV cable. October 21, 2025. Tony installs the high-security locks, and I reclaim my home. I step back to look at the wall. When you saw, it displayed sequentially like that. The pattern was absolutely undeniable. This wasn't just an unwelcome son-in-law overstaying his welcome. This was a predator circling from the exact moment he arrived. Next came the classification of the evidence into three distinct color-coded folders. A system I had mastered during a city corruption investigation back in 2009. The red folder held the financial evidence, the credit card statements detailing the $47,000 in fraudulent charges, side-by-side printouts of my forged signature next to my real one, and the bank records showing my checking account balance dropping from comfortable to concerning. The blue folder contained the communication trail. Every single email between Jason and Susan Whitfield, the Dawn Meadow application, and the text messages I had photographed from Jason's phone, including messages to Kingsley discussing a timeline for when the old man would be out of the picture. The green folder was reserved for witness corroboration. Barbara Peterson from next door, who saw Jason moving boxes out of my basement back in July. Arthur Coleman from 3 doors down, who overheard Jason on the phone openly discussing the market value of my property. And Karen Phillips from across the street, who noted that I had suddenly stopped waving to the neighborhood right around the Tim. Jason started answering my front door for me. The folders sat from left to right across the desk. The beginning, the middle, and the end of the case. At 11:45 a.m., I dialed a number I hadn't called in over 6 months. Stephen Hughes. Steve, it's Joe Brennan. A brief silence hung on the line before he responded. Joe, I haven't heard from you since the spring. Is everything all right? Stephen and I had shared a newsroom at the Tribune for 20 years. He moved over to the Sun-Times in 2015, but we always stayed in touch, maintaining a friendship built on shared journalistic cynicism. I need a quick favor. Can you pull a property search for an address for me? What kind of address? The kind someone looks for when they've lost an apartment and need to find a cheap short-term lease immediately. Stephen was smart enough not to pry. Give me 2 hours, Joe. I'll text you. Thanks, Steve. I hung up and turned back to the desk to complete the final piece of the war room puzzle, the nut graph. In journalism, that's the paragraph that explains the core of the entire story. I opened my laptop and typed out the facts using the classic framework: who, what, when, where, and why. Joseph Brennan, 67, a retired investigative journalist, is the sole owner of a residential property valued at approximately $800,000. In April 2024, his daughter, Kingsley Brennan, and son-in-law, Jason Caldwell, moved into the residence under the guise of temporary housing. Over an 18-month period, Jason Caldwell engaged in a systematic pattern of financial exploitation, including identity theft, $47,000 in credit card fraud, and a conspiracy to unlawfully commit the homeowner to a long-term care facility, with the ultimate goal of gaining control of the property via a fraudulent power of attorney. 3 sentences containing every critical piece of information. By 2 p.m., the war room was fully operational. The timeline was on the wall, the evidence was sorted into folders, and the definitive summary report was printed. Standing in the middle of my room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Friday afternoon. Total control. Not a desperate, angry control, but a calm, methodical certainty. It was the exact mindset of a man who spent his entire career dismantling people who believed they were above the law. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. Found 3 potential spots. Oak Towers on 4th Street is the closest and cheapest. Single studio apartments, month-to-month leases available immediately. I saved the address and took one final look at the room. The evidence was compiled. The timeline was solid. The witnesses were identified, and the war room was ready. But as every reporter knows, evidence means absolutely nothing without action. Unchallenged facts are just paper sitting inside a folder. At 2:30 p.m., I grabbed my car keys and drove down to Community First Bank on Oakwood Avenue, the very same branch where Catherine and I opened our first joint account back in 1983. This branch had processed my paychecks from the Tribune for 42 years. The tellers here knew our names and had sent a beautiful arrangement when Catherine passed. Now, I was walking through those doors to report that my own family had been stealing from me. The lobby was incredibly quiet for a Monday afternoon. 2 tellers stood behind the counter, and an older couple was speaking quietly over at the mortgage desk under the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I walked up to the reception desk, where a young woman wearing a name tag that read Jessica looked up. "I need to speak with the branch manager," I said clearly. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, I don't. This is regarding active fraud on my accounts. It's urgent." Her expression changed instantly. "Please take a seat. Let me see if Miss Foster is available." I sat in the waiting area, holding the red folder firmly on my lap. Through the glass wall, I could see Linda Foster in her office, a phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was in her late 50s with her dark hair pulled back neatly, exuding the absolute competence of someone with decades of banking experience. She looked up, recognized me, and gave a sharp nod. 10 minutes later, Jessica escorted me into the office. "Mr. Brennan," Linda said, standing up to give my hand a firm shake. Jessica mentioned a fraud issue. "Please, have a seat." I placed the red folder right between us on her desk. "Mrs. Foster, I need to officially report identity theft and massive credit card fraud. I am the victim." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "When did you first notice this activity?" "Friday night. But it has been happening systematically for 6 months." I opened the folder, revealing the credit card statements with highlighted charges, the signature comparisons, and the screenshots of luxury purchases I had never made. Linda leaned forward, methodically reviewing every single page. When she reached the signature comparisons, her mouth tightened into a firm line. "Mr. Brennan," she said softly, "this totals $47,000. "Yes, it does. And you only just discovered this." "I placed my trust in the wrong people." She looked at me, and I recognized that exact expression. The look a professional gives when they realize they aren't dealing with a simple mistake, but a serious situation. "Who did this?" "My son-in-law. He intercepted my mail, forged my signature, and used my credit cards entirely without my authorization." She let out a slow breath and reached directly for her phone. "This constitutes financial elder abuse. It's a severe offense." "I know. I used to cover financial crimes for the Chicago Tribune." A slight shift crossed her expression, a look of quiet respect. She dialed an internal line immediately. "This is Linda Foster at the Oakwood branch. I need to clear an identity theft and unauthorized card usage case." The total amount is approximately $47,000, spanning a 6-month period. She listened for a moment. Yes, I'll hold. While she waited, she pulled up my account history on her screen. I watched her scroll through transaction after transaction. Steakhouse dinners I never ate, boutique shops I never stepped foot in, and luxury hotel stays while I was sitting at home watching documentaries. Yes, I'm here, she said back into the phone, reading off my account numbers clearly. Freeze all cards immediately. Issue formal disputes for every single flagged charge. The client is present with complete documentation. Understood. She ended the call and turned back to face me. Your cards are frozen as of this exact second. No further purchases can be made. We've also placed an enhanced fraud protection alert on your entire account profile. Moving forward, any transaction over $50 will require direct voice verification from you personally. Perfect. I will also be delivering this documentation to law enforcement and my legal counsel. She glanced down at the folder. Do you have representation? Charles Norton. A slight smile touched her lips. Charlie Norton. I know him well. You are in excellent hands. She spent the next 20 minutes generating the official reports, completing the necessary affidavits, and establishing the formal record. Every single time I signed my name, my actual signature, I felt another piece of my control firmly locking back into place. Mr. Brennan, she asked carefully, does your daughter know what her husband has been doing? That question hit heavier than any dollar amount on those statements. I don't know, I admitted honestly, but I fully intend to find out. She gathered the completed paperwork and handed me a final document jacket. Here is the confirmation of the fraud report, your case numbers, the disputed amounts, and the official filing dates. Keep a copy for your records. I always keep a copy. She smiled warmly. Old habits of a reporter. Something like that. She walked me right to the door. I am so incredibly sorry this happened, Joe. No one should ever be forced to protect themselves from their own family. You're right, I agreed, looking out at the fading light. They shouldn't. By 4 p.m., I left the bank with the official fraud confirmation in my hand and $47,000 in unauthorized activity, permanently flagged and frozen. The low October sun cut across the parking lot, casting long, dramatic shadows over the asphalt. In less than 2 hours, Jason and Kingsley would be heading home. They would pull into the driveway just like they did every single Monday. Jason would reach for his keys, completely unaware that they would no longer turn the lock. I drove home with the fraud packet riding shotgun, entirely prepared for whatever was going to happen next. At 4:30 p.m., when I walked through the front door, the house was completely still. The new mechanism turned like silk under my key. It was my key now, and mine alone. I placed the bank's fraud packet directly on the kitchen counter and checked the clock on the microwave. Jason and Kingsley typically walked through the door between 6:00 and 6:30 p.m. That gave me exactly 2 hours. I walked up the stairs to the bedroom they had been using. My former home office. A room Catherine had helped me paint a soft gray back in 2012. The door stood wide open. I lingered in the doorway for a moment, taking in the way they had completely altered the space to make it their own. Their bed sat right where my desk used to be. Jason's suits hung in the closet that once held my investigative files. Kingsley's nursing scrubs were draped carelessly over a chair. 18 months ago, I had helped them carry their heavy boxes up these exact stairs. It's just temporary, Dad, Kingsley had said, giving me a tight hug. Before you know it, We'll be out of your hair. I walked over to the closet and pulled out 4 large, blue Samsonite hardshell suitcases. I had bought them for Kingsley last Christmas, when she mentioned wanting to take a vacation. She never actually got around to booking. The irony wasn't lost on me. I started with Jason's side of the closet. I pulled his suits off the hangers and placed them directly into the first suitcase. No folding, no care, just complete removal. Gray suits, navy suits, and that incredibly expensive charcoal one he wore to a real estate conference back in August, likely purchased with my stolen credit card. Next came his shoes. Dress shoes, sneakers, and those $600 Italian leather loafers I'd spotted on the transaction list Linda Foster showed me. Everything went into the suitcase. His toiletries from the bathroom, his electric razor, cologne, hair gel, and the laptop charger he kept plugged in by the bed. I unplugged it, rolled it up loosely, and tossed it right on top of his suits. The first suitcase filled up quickly. I zipped it shut and moved on to the second. Kingsley's side of the closet was significantly harder to process. I reached for a hanger and froze. It held the beige cardigan she wore last Christmas morning. We had made pancakes together, her, Jason, and me, using Catherine's old recipe. Kingsley had laughed at something, and for a brief moment, it felt like a real family again. It felt like having them here wasn't such a bad thing after all. I folded the cardigan with care and placed it gently into the suitcase. Then came her scrubs, her running shoes, her meticulously organized scarves, and the hairbrush from her vanity. Every single item felt heavier than it actually was. I pulled open her nightstand drawer to pack the contents and found a photo. It was a 5x7 silver frame I had given her for her high school graduation. The photo inside showed a 5-year-old Kingsley with a gap-toothed smile, tightly hugging a teddy bear I had won for her at the county fair. She had named him Mr. Buttons, and she slept with him every single night until she turned 12. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the frame. In 2007, I had helped her pack up for college, loading a trunk full of dreams and new bed sheets to drive her down to Northwestern University. I remembered watching her walk into her dorm with that exact same gap-toothed confidence, ready to become a nurse and help people. Now, 18 years later, I was packing her things to remove her from my home. A profound heaviness spread through my chest. It wasn't anger. It was something else entirely. It felt like pure grief. I loved my daughter more than life itself, and I would have given her absolutely anything. In fact, I had given her everything. My home, my absolute trust, and 18-month-ish patience and the benefit of the doubt. But I couldn't let that love destroy me. Not anymore. I placed the photo face down inside the suitcase and continued packing. The second suitcase was filled, then the third. By the time I zipped up the fourth, my hands were noticeably shaking. Not from weakness, but from the absolute finality of the act. Moving those suitcases down the stairs proved much more physically demanding than I anticipated. A 67-year-old body isn't meant to carry 50-pound loads down a flight of stairs 4 times in a row. But adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and I was relying on much more than just adrenaline. I was sustained by 42 years of dedication to the truth, and the sheer weight of living under a lie for 18 months. I dragged each suitcase over to the front door, lining them up in a perfect row. The 4 blue Samsonite cases stood like soldiers, awaiting orders. Everything Jason and Kingsley had brought into this house was packed up and ready to go. The clock in the hallway read 5:28 p.m. I walked into the living room and sat in the armchair. Catherine always preferred the one positioned directly facing the front window. From here, I had a clear view of the driveway. I would see them the exact moment they pulled in. When Jason tried the lock and realized his key was useless, when they saw those suitcases, you or about the glassroom upstairs, the timeline, the warrant on the walls, the organized folders, the fraud report on the kitchen counter, and my meeting tomorrow morning at 9 with Charles Norton. I thought about the broken cable sitting inside an old electronic box in the basement, the placement, the piece of plastic that had changed everything, and I thought about Kingsley, my daughter, the gap-toothed 5-year-old who used to believe I could do absolutely anything. The 38-year-old woman who, just days ago, stood right here in this living room and took her husband's side while he degraded me. Did she know? Did she know about the credit cards and the memory care plot, or had Jason manipulated her just as thoroughly as he had tried to manipulate me? I didn't have the answer yet. But in less than an hour, I would find out. The house grew completely quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed softly. The late afternoon sun stretched across the room, casting long shadows over the hardwood floors. Catherine and I had refinished together back in 1998. I sat in the armchair, keeping my eyes fixed on the driveway, and I waited. The waiting ended at precisely 6:07 p.m. I heard the aggressive roar of Jason's truck first. That loud, posturing engine he thought made him sound successful. Kingsley's sedan followed closely behind, pulling into the driveway much quieter. I didn't move an inch from the armchair. I just listened. The sound of car doors closing, 2 distinct thuds, one heavy slam, one softer click. Footsteps approaching the porch. The sound of shoes wiping against the welcome mat Catherine had bought at Target back in 2016. The one with "Home Sweet Home" printed across it in neat script. Then came the exact sound I had been waiting for. The sharp jangle of keys. A key sliding into a lock cylinder that no longer recognized it. The sound of friction, a forced turn, and a confused grunt. "What the hell?" Jason's voice was muffled through the heavy wood. "The key isn't working. It must be jammed or something." "Let me try," Kingsley said, her tone much softer. Still fully believing there was a simple explanation. More jangling, another forced turn, and the door handle rattling violently. "That's bizarre. Mine isn't working either." I sat perfectly still in Catherine's chair. Through the front window, I could see their silhouettes cast against the porch light. Jason was bending down to inspect the lock, while Kingsley stood directly behind him, her bag still slung over her shoulder. "This doesn't make any sense." Jason's voice shifted, turning sharp as suspicion began to creep in. "Joe, you in there?" I didn't offer a word. The door handle rattled even harder now, metal grinding against metal. "If you're playing some kind of game..." "Maybe he isn't home," Kingsley suggested. "Maybe something is actually wrong with the lock mechanism. We should just call a locksmith. His car is sitting right in the driveway, Kingsley. He's inside." Through the glass, I watched Jason straighten up and turn to face his wife. I saw the exact moment his confusion hardened into something entirely different. "Come on." His shadow moved away from the entrance. "Let's try the back." I listened to their footsteps move around the side of the house, disappearing around the corner. At 6:12 p.m., I heard them at the back door. The exact same sequence played out. The key, the lock, the failure, and the mounting frustration. By 6:15 p.m., they were at the garage door, Jason's voice cutting clearly through the walls. "What is going on here?" At 6:18 p.m., I heard them at the basement window, the one that always stuck during humid weather. Jason had pried it open last summer when I accidentally locked myself out while working in the garden. This time, it wouldn't budge. Tony Valdez had been incredibly thorough. The footsteps rounded back to the front of the house, moving much faster and heavier this time. Then, the pounding began. Jason's fist hit the heavy wood 3 times, hard enough to make the entire frame vibrate. "I know you're in there, Joe. Open the door." I remained seated, keeping my breathing completely steady, keeping my eyes fixed on the window where I could see his flushed face. He had loosened his tie now, one hand bracing against the doorframe while the other continued to pound. Jason Kingsley's voice carried a distinct note of anxiety now. She wanted him to calm down. Maybe something happened. Maybe Dad is hurt, or something is wrong. "Oh, please," Jason barked, followed by 3 more heavy thuds. The door shook in its frame. The old man changed the locks. Total silence followed. I watched Kingsley's silhouette freeze completely. "What? Changed the locks, Jason?" "He changed the damn locks. That's why our keys don't work." "But why would he do that? How should I know? Maybe he's finally lost his mind. Maybe we need to call someone to come out here and have him evaluated." "Joe!" More pounding rattled the frame. "Open this door right now." Across the street, I noticed movement in Barbara Peterson's window. The curtains parted by an inch, revealing her pale face, watching the scene unfold in the twilight. Perfect. Witnesses are always important. "You can't lock us out!" Jason was shouting at full volume now, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. "This is my house too. I live here. Jason, please." Kingsley's voice was tiny and frightened. I realized then that she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of him, terrified of whatever was happening that she didn't yet understand. "Open the damn door!" The pounding intensified, both fists hammering against the wood now. If I let this noise continue any longer, the neighbors would call the police. I looked up at the clock on the mantel. 6:19 p.m. Exactly 12 minutes had passed since they arrived. 12 minutes of escalation. 12 minutes where Jason revealed exactly who he was when things didn't go his way. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting from sitting, so long as the adrenaline began to level out. I walked past the row of 4 blue suitsies standing like soldiers, past the kitchen counter where the bank's fraud packet sat, and into the entryway where the pounding was deafening. Smoke. Through the peephole I could see Jason, his face entirely flushed, the veins in his neck bulging as he raised his fist for another round. Behind him, Kingsley held both hands over her mouth, her eyes incredibly wide. My daughter, at 38, looked exactly like she did at 5 years old. Terrified, confused, and waiting for someone to explain what was happening. I turned the heavy thumb turn of the new deadbolt, the one that cost me $240, and Tony Valdez absolute discretion. Then, I opened the door. I only opened it exactly 6 inches. Just enough for them to see my face, but nowhere near enough for them to step inside. The heavy security chain pulled tight between us, establishing a highly visible boundary they had forced me to draw. Jason's eyes dropped to the chain, then snapped right back to me. Shock flashed across his features before instantly hardening back into rage. "Can I help you with something?" My voice was calm, steady, and entirely level. It was the exact tone I used in interrogation rooms when I needed someone to talk themselves into a corner. "Help us." Jason's face contorted. "What did you do to the locks?" "What the hell is wrong with you?" This is my house. Actually, Jason, you might want to double-check the deed. This is my house. My name is the only one on it, and the mortgage was fully paid off back in 2008. You were a guest. Past tense. Dad? Kingsley's voice cracked. Dad, what's going on? Why can't we come inside? I looked at my daughter through the narrow opening. Her mascara was slightly smudged, her eyes exhausted and frightened. Because I know, I said clearly. I know about the credit cards. The $47,000 taken from me. And I know about the memory care facility plot. I know every single thing. The words hung heavily in the evening air. Jason slammed his weight against the door, but the security chain held perfectly firm. You're out of your mind, he shouted. You're old and confused. You don't even know what you're talking about. I reached behind me and picked up the credit card documentation from the bank, holding the pages right up to the 6-inch opening. Forged signatures, Jason. The fraud department has already verified it. Would you like to see the report, Kingsley? Don't listen to him, Jason said quickly, his tone dropping as he tried to regain control of the narrative. He's confused, Kings. He's old. He's putting things together that aren't real. I spent 42 years as a reporter, I told him calmly. I know exactly how to document evidence, and I know how to build a case. I know. Case. I held up the printed email threads. I have your entire correspondence with Dawn Meadow. The application is completely filled out with my personal information. You had a timeline to liquidate my home the second I was locked away. All the color drained from Kingsley's face. She turned slowly to face her husband. Jason, her voice shook violently. Is this true? Of course not. Jason snapped, grabbing her arm with a possessive grip. He's paranoid. This is exactly why we were trying to find him some help. Then explain this, I said, sliding a single printed email through the gap. It fluttered down onto the porch. Kingsley picked it up, her eyes scanning the page as her breathing shifted completely. Jason, she whispered, this is your email address. This is real. Kingsley, let me explain. You were going to put my father in a facility. Her voice rose. You were going to sell his house without telling me? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Jason snapped his head back toward me, his mask completely shattering. This is all your fault, he hissed, his face contorting. You're too stubborn. You can't live alone. You need care. We were trying to help you. By stealing $47,000? That money was going to be ours anyway. When you pass, when the house sells, we just adjusted the timeline. An absolute silence fell over the porch. Kingsley just stared at him. What did you just say? Jason froze. He knew the second the words left his mouth that there was no taking them back. The truth was entirely exposed. You don't understand, he said desperately, gesturing toward the structure. This property is worth $800,000. $800,000. Just sitting here being wasted by an old man. He lunged forward again, but the security chain stopped him cold, the frame shaking under the impact. I took a single step back, remaining entirely composed. I strongly suggest you step away from the door, I said quietly. Barbara Peterson is watching from across the street. And assault is a serious offense. Jason stepped back, his chest heaving as his hands shook with rage. He pulled out his phone. Fine, I'm calling the police. I'm reporting elder neglect. You're incompetent. Go right ahead, I replied. I have the fraud documentation, the forged signatures, the emails, and a meeting tomorrow morning with my attorney. Charles Norton. His finger hovered over the screen. You're bluffing. I spent 42 years calling bluffs, Jason. I never bluff. Behind him, Kingsley sank onto the porch steps. The printed email clutched tightly in her hand as her shoulders began to shake. Kingsley, I said softly through the gap. Did you know about the credit cards? Did you know about the facility? She looked up at me, her eyes completely bloodshot. No, she whispered. I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know. I believed her. Jason lowered his phone. You can't do this, he said. We have rights. You don't, I answered. Your name is nowhere on this property. Your personal belongings have been thoroughly packed. There are 4 blue suitcases right inside the door. You can take them and leave now. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I said. But you really should have thought about that before. Jason glared at me with pure animosity. This isn't over. Yes, I said quietly. It is. I closed the door, turning the deadbolt back into place, hearing the solid click of the mechanism, locking them out. Through the thick wood, I could hear my daughter begin to cry. By 6:45 p.m., flashing red and blue lights illuminated the front of my house. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, with that deliberate, slow authority that announces a formal presence to the entire neighborhood. I watched through the living room window as the emergency lights painted the autumn evening in strobes of color. Across the street, Barbara Peterson's front door opened completely. Karen Phillips walked out onto her porch 2 doors down, and Arthur Coleman appeared by his mailbox, not even pretending he wasn't staring directly at the scene. This was the backup Jason had called. Or rather, it was exactly the audience I needed. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol cars. The first was a built man in his late 40s who carried the absolute authority of someone who had spent 2 decades on the force. His name, Tag Red Reynolds. The second officer, Davis, was younger, likely in his early 30s. Jason met them halfway down the walkway, his voice carrying clearly through the crisp evening air. Officers, thank goodness you're here. He pointed dramatically toward the house, gesturing toward me where I remained visible through the window. My father-in-law is having some kind of episode. He's locked us out of our own home. His behavior is completely erratic. We're deeply concerned for his safety. He might have had a stroke, or, I don't know, maybe it's dementia. Behind him, Kingsley stood near the sidewalk, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face completely blotched from crying. When she spoke, her voice trembled. He's never like this. Dad has always been completely grounded. I don't understand what's happening. Officer Reynolds raised a hand to calm the situation. Let's take a breath, everyone. We'll handle this step by step. He looked at Jason, then at Kingsley, and finally back at the house. Sir, you're saying this is your father-in-law's residence? Yes, but we've been living here for 18 months. We're a family unit. We have established tenancy rights here. And is he the sole owner of the property? The legal title holder? Jason hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, yes, technically, but then that's where we start. Reynolds walked up to the front door and knocked firmly. Sir, police department, could you please step to the door? I was already standing right there on the other side of the heavy wood. I opened it, keeping the security chain engaged so the door caught at the exact same 6-inch gap. Officer Reynolds. Yes, sir. Are you the homeowner here? I am. Joseph Brennan, sole owner. The mortgage was fully satisfied back in 2008. Reynolds nodded slowly, his eyes assessing the security chain, the narrow opening, and my calm demeanor. Mr. Brennan, your son-in-law, called us out here. He claims you've locked them out and expressed concern regarding your mental state. Officer, I'm a retired investigative journalist. I spent 42 years with the Chicago Tribune. My mental state is perfectly intact. What is not intact is the $47,000 they have systematically taken from my accounts. I paused, letting the statement land. I have complete documentation right inside if you'd care to step in and review it. Just you, officer. Reynolds looked back at Jason and Kingsley, then glanced over at his partner. Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Brennan, please wait out here with Officer Davis for a moment. I'm going to step inside and speak with Mr. Brennan. But you can't just. Jason started to object. Sir, it's his property. Reynolds cut him off firmly. If he invites me inside, I'm going in. Please wait here. I unlatched the chain and opened the door to let him through, closing it immediately behind him to shut out Jason's loud protests. In the living room, I had laid out all the files sequentially across the coffee table, exactly how an investigator displays a verified case. Officer, here is the original property deed, solely in my name, along with the satisfaction of mortgage document from 2008. I explained, gesturing to the papers. These are the credit card statements, documenting $47,000 in unauthorized charges over the last 6 months, complete with signature comparisons showing my real signature versus the forgery. And these are the email exchanges between my son-in-law and a memory care facility consultant, detailing a plan to have me committed so they could liquidate this house. Reynolds pulled out a small flashlight and methodically reviewed every single page. He took his time, spending 5 full minutes inspecting the documentation. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Brennan, what you have documented here constitutes financial elder abuse, identity theft, and grand larceny, he said clearly. You are well within your legal rights to deny them entry to your home. In fact, given this evidence, I would strongly advise it. I just want my home back, officer, and I want them held fully accountable. I will be filing a formal report on this. You should contact an attorney immediately. He paused, noticing the business card displayed on the table. I see you already have Charlie Norton's card here. That's excellent. Very smart move. He made several notes in his pad and took photos of a few key documents with his secure phone. Once he was satisfied, he stood up. Mr. Brennan, you are entirely the victim in this situation, not them. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We walked back to the front door together. When Reynolds opened it and stepped out onto the porch, Officer Davis was standing exactly where he had been left with Jason and Kingsley. The neighbors were still watching from their lawns, the red and blue strobe lights continuing to wash over the street. Reynolds walked down the porch steps to face them directly. Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Brennan, I have reviewed the situation inside, he announced, his voice carrying over the yard. This property belongs exclusively to Joseph Brennan. He has provided documented evidence of extensive financial crimes committed against him. You are not legal residents of this property. You need to leave the premises immediately. Jason's face turned deep red. This is completely insane. We live here. The old man is completely making things up. He's confused, Sir, I have personally reviewed the bank statements, the forged signatures, and the email correspondence arranging a facility placement entirely without his knowledge or consent. Reynolds cut him off, his voice dropping to a hard, no-nonsense register. If you do not voluntarily step off this property within the next 5 minutes, I will arrest you for criminal trespass and initiate formal charges for the offenses documented by Mr. Brennan. You can't be serious. I am incredibly serious, Mr. Caldwell. Officer Davis stepped forward slightly. Officer, there are 4 suitcases sitting right inside the front door. It looks like Mr. Brennan has already packed their personal belongings. Reynolds looked back at me, and I gave a single nod. Then I suggest you take your bags and leave. Right now. The sheer humiliation must have been absolutely excruciating for him. Jason Caldwell, the man who spent 18 months strutting around this neighborhood as if he owned the entire block, was now being forced to carry his suitcases to his truck under the direct gaze of Barbara Peterson, Karen Phillips, Arthur Coleman, and half the street. He grabbed 2 of the blue suitcases, refusing to look at me or any of the neighbors. He marched down the walkway with an angry, rigid stride, his shoulders visibly shaking with suppressed rage. Kingsley frozen on the sidewalk, staring down at the remaining 2 suitcases. Then, she slowly lifted her gaze to meet mine where I stood in the doorway. Dad. Just one word. That was all she said. But that single word carried 18 months of painful history, 38 years of being my daughter, and the heavy realization that she had chosen the wrong side. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words caught somewhere between my heart and my throat, trapped by everything I wanted to tell her and everything that shouldn't be said. Ma. She picked up the final 2 suitcases and walked toward Jason's truck, loading them into the back without looking at him. They climbed into the cab, and the engine roared to life. Jason backed out of the driveway, leaving my property for the very last time. The truck drove down Maple Avenue, its taillights shrinking into the twilight until it turned the corner and completely vanished. Officer Reynolds walked over to the door where I was still standing. You did the right thing, Mr. Brennan. I know it doesn't feel great at the moment, but you protected yourself. That's what matters. Yes. Thank you, officer. Get that packet over to your attorney. Press charges if you can. People like that don't stop until you push back hard. He handed me a card with the case report number. Then, he and Officer Davis got back into their cruisers and drove away, taking the red and blue strobe lights with them. The street fell completely dark again. The ordinary, quiet darkness of a suburban October evening. One by one, the neighbors retreated inside. Barbara Peterson was the last to go, lingering on her porch for a brief moment to catch my eye. She gave me a single, supportive nod before heading inside. I stood at the threshold, my house, my locks, my key, staring out at the empty driveway. It was 7:15 p.m. on a Monday. 18 months of invasion had been dismantled and ended in less than 30 minutes. I stepped back inside and closed the door. By 8 p.m., the street was entirely quiet again. The neighbors were tucked away in their homes, though I was certain that behind those closed curtains, phone lines were buzzing as everyone replayed what they had just witnessed. The police were gone. The flashing emergency lights had faded into memory, and I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in 18 months. I shut the door, my lock, my house, and leaned my back against it. Standing there with my eyes closed, I took a deep breath. It was the first real, unburdened breath I had been able to take since April of 2024. This silence felt fundamentally different. It wasn't the tense, suffocating quiet where I had to measure every syllable. Hit into the rain, wondering if Jason was about to lose his temper or if Kingsley was going to give me that patronizing look, telling me to let it go. This silence had weight, but it wasn't crushing me. This silence belonged to me. I walked slowly through the house. First, the living room, looking at the armchair where I had sat waiting for them to return, and the coffee table, where less than an hour ago I had displayed the evidence to Officer Reynolds. Everything was completely still and perfectly intact. Next was the kitchen. Jason's coffee mug was sitting in the sink. That expensive ceramic cup printed with a pretentious quote about success. I washed it, dried it, and tucked it away in the back of the cabinet. Tomorrow I would donate it. Tonight I just needed it out of sight. His shoes were waiting by the back door. Size 11 Nikes, barely worn. I picked them up, slid them into a plastic bag, and set them aside. His jacket was draped over a dining chair, the navy blue one with the real estate logo embroidered on the chest. I folded it up and added it to the pile. Every single item I cleared away felt like reclaiming lost territory, like planting a flag on ground that had been occupied for far too long. The space was mine again. At 8:30 p.m., I opened the refrigerator and truly looked inside. For months, I had survived on whatever was fastest and caused the least amount of friction in the house. Tonight, I pulled out pasta, butter, and garlic. Simple. The exact meal Catherine used to throw together whenever neither of us felt like making a fuss. I boiled the water, chopped the garlic, and melted the butter in the pan. The aroma filled the kitchen, warm and instantly familiar. For the first time since they moved in, the house actually smelled like my own cooking. I sat down at the dining table instead of standing at the counter. No television, no background chatter. There was only the sound of my fork against the plate and the steady, comforting hum of the refrigerator. Peace. That was the only word for it. But with peace came the memories. I thought about Kingsley, about the exact way she looked at me from the sidewalk when she said, "Dad." A single word carrying 18 months of confusion and 38 years being my daughter. Did she know about the care facility plot? Did she know about the credit cards? Or had she been deceived as well, manipulated by a man skilled at controlling people? Doubt started to creep in. What if she truly didn't know? What if I had just destroyed my relationship with my daughter over actions she never consented to? Then I remembered every single time he took over my mail. Every time he made me feel like an intruder in my own home. And she had defended him every step of the way. She had told me I was overreacting, that I was being too sensitive, and that he meant well. Time and time again, she had chosen him over me. At 9 p.m., I called Charles Norton. He answered almost immediately. "Joe, I've been waiting to hear from you." "The police came," I told him. Officer Reynolds reviewed everything and told them they had to leave. "They are gone." "That's excellent news," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I don't really know yet." "That's fair. Listen, you did everything exactly right. But you need to stay prepared. A man like Jason isn't going to take this quietly." "I know. Stay inside your house and stay vigilant. Keep those doors locked. If anything happens, you call me immediately." "I will. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9. We'll initiate the formal legal proceedings, the restraining orders, the civil suit, and we'll follow up on the criminal charges. See you then." After I hung up, the house felt even larger and quieter. The old clock Catherine bought back in 1994 ticked steadily on the mantel. At 10 p.m., I turned on the news, watching stories that had absolutely nothing to do with me, trying my best not to picture where Kingsley and Jason were sleeping tonight. My gaze drifted to a photo on the side table. Catherine, 45 years old, smiling in our backyard. It was taken in 2002, when she was healthy and completely happy. Did I do the right thing? I asked the empty room. Did I choose survival over our daughter's happiness? The photograph didn't answer, but the memory did. I remembered Catherine in the hospital back in October of 2020. She was weak, but her eyes were incredibly sharp. She held my hand tightly and made me promise. Take care of Kingsley, she had whispered. I will. But Joe, she had added, squeezing my hand even harder, promise me you'll take care of yourself too. Don't let anyone diminish who you are. I had promised her. 3 days later, she was gone. 5 years later, I was finally keeping both of those promises. At 11 p.m., I went upstairs, brushed my teeth in a bathroom completely free of Jason's cologne, and slid under the covers of my own bed. Pulling the blankets tight, the house creaked in all its familiar places. The October wind brushed against the windows. Tomorrow would bring the lawyers, the legal system, and the consequences. Dan Jimwan Watrazalela. 3 days passed in a state of suspension. On Tuesday, I met with Charles at his office and signed the paperwork. The restraining order applications, the formal fraud affidavits, and the preparations for the civil suit. My signature, my actual signature, went down on document after document while Charles explained the timeline in that calm, steady legal register that made everything feel manageable. On Wednesday, I called a contractor to replace the glass in the front window, right where the cable connection had been located. I told him I had accidentally broken it while moving a piece of furniture. It was a minor lie, but infinitely easier than explaining that I needed to erase the physical reminder of that afternoon. I called Kingsley twice that day. Both times, it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I couldn't find any words that didn't sound like an accusation or an apology for my own survival. By Thursday morning, the anxiety began to sharpen. It lingered through my breakfast, sat heavily during my second cup of coffee, and distracted me from the news I wasn't really watching. So, I did what I've done for the past 42 years. I started investigating. At 9 a.m., I called Stephen Hughes. Joe, I was hoping you'd call. I dug up what you were looking for. That was fast. Old habits, he said, the sound of paper rustling over the line. There's a place on the east side called Oak Towers. It offers single studio apartments, weekly leases, no questions asked. If someone needs a cheap place in a hurry, that's where they end up. Give me the address. A brief pause hung on the line. Joe, are you tracking someone down? My daughter, I said. I know how that sounds. Man. More papers rustled. 1247 Oak Street. Apartment 3B. The lease was signed Monday night. The only name on it is Jason Caldwell, not Kingsley. Just him. Joe, what exactly is going on out there? I'll fill you in later, Steve. Thank you. Take care of yourself. I hung up and stared at the address written on my yellow legal pad. My daughter was living in a weekly rental. At 2:00 p.m., I parked across the street from Oak Towers. It was a 4-story building of faded brick with rusted fire escapes, iron bars over the lower windows, and graffiti scarring the entrance. A liquor store sat on one corner, and a check-cashing place occupied the other. This was where Kingsley was sleeping after finishing a 12-hour nursing shift. Was it because I removed her from my home, or because Jason stole $47,000 and ruined their lives? That distinction mattered immensely to me. I watched the entrance for an hour. A woman walked by struggling with groceries and 2 young children. An older man stood smoking. A teenager walked past looking entirely lost. At 3 p.m., The door opened and Jason stepped out. Even from across the street, I could tell he was completely intoxicated. In the middle of the afternoon, he was swaying, clumsily fumbling with his keys. He dropped them onto the pavement, laughed to himself, picked them up, and finally climbed into his truck. Trucked, a part of my mind wanted to follow him, to document the behavior and add it to the file. But this wasn't a news investigation anymore. It was turning into an obsession. I watched his truck swerve slightly as it drove away. Then I turned my car in the opposite direction and drove home. At 4 p.m., I stopped by Barbara Peterson's house. She answered the door wearing her gardening gloves. "Joe, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Barbara. I need a favor." I handed her a card with my number written on it. "If Kingsley comes looking for me, give her this. Tell her that if she needs me, I am right here. Just tell her that." Barbara's expression softened completely. "We all saw what happened on Monday, Joe. The police, everything. You did exactly what you had to do." "Did I?" "Joe, we've lived on this block for 30 years. We know exactly who you are. Don't start doubting yourself now." I nodded, offering a quiet thank you, and left before saying anything I couldn't take back. At 6 p.m., while I was preparing a dinner I didn't really have an appetite for, Charles called. "The restraining order hearing is set for next Thursday. The police have officially opened a grand larceny investigation into the fraud, and the civil suit will be filed by the first week of November." "That's good. One more thing, Joe. I tried to reach out to your daughter. She isn't responding. She won't take my calls either over. How do you want to handle it?" "I'm giving her space," I told him. "She needs to see Jason for exactly who he is on her own terms. If she can't, then I have to accept that I protected myself and spoke the truth. The rest is her choice." Charles remained quiet for a moment. "That's a very rational way to look at it, Joe. But it still hurts." "Yes, it does." By 10 p.m., I was sitting in the living room with the television muted. My decaf coffee sat cooling on the table, completely untouched. My phone sat face up on the table, as if staring at it hard enough would make it ring. But it stayed silent. I pictured Kingsley in that apartment, thought about Jason being completely drunk at 3 in the afternoon, and envisioned the exact kind of man who destroys everything around him, numbs himself, and leaves his wife to work herself to the bone to cover the wreckage. I remembered Catherine's promise. Take care of Kingsley, but take care of yourself too. Was I actually doing that? Leaving her at Oak Towers while I stayed inside a paid-off house, consumed by worry? Or was this truly the only option left? Allowing her to see the unvarnished truth for herself, rather than trying to force it on her. The phone remained completely silent. Outside, the October wind rattled the newly repaired window frame, and I sat there, still waiting for my daughter to come home. Friday passed quietly. Far too quietly. I went to bed around midnight, completely worn out by another day of waiting for a phone call that never arrived. But I couldn't shake the distinct feeling that something was looming, that this quiet was completely temporary. Men like Jason Caldwell don't just accept defeat. They stew in it until it turns into absolute fury. At 2:14 a.m., I found out I was exactly right. The sound of shattering glass tore me from my sleep like an alarm. It wasn't a crack or a rhythmic tapping. It was a loud, explosive impact that meant something heavy had just smashed through a large window. Before my brain could even fully process the noise, I was out of bed. My heart was hammering violently against my ribs and my phone was already firmly in my hand. 42 years in journalism had trained me to grab the camera to document the facts first and ask questions second. Another massive crash echoed from downstairs. The living room window. I ran to the upstairs window overlooking the front yard and looked down. Jason Caldwell was standing directly in my driveway, under the streetlights, gripping a baseball bat, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His truck was parked crookedly against the curb, with the driver's side door flung wide open. Even from the second floor, I could see him swaying. To say he was intoxicated was a massive understatement. "This is my house." His voice ripped through the quiet October night, loud enough to wake the entire block, heavily slurred and filled with malice. "You stole it from me, you old bastard. You took everything." He swung the bat with everything he had. Smashing my mailbox, the one Catherine and I had installed back in 1997, into splinters. I unlocked my phone and started recording video. The timestamp read 2:16 a.m. Jason staggered toward the ceramic planters sitting on the porch, the ones we had bought together at the farmer's market last spring. The bat connected cleanly, sending shards of stoneware and soil, exploding across the walkway. Then he pulled something else from his jacket pocket, a can of spray paint. Under the glow of the streetlights, I watched him shake the can unsteadily and walk toward the garage door. He began spraying. From where I stood, I couldn't read every single word, but I didn't need to. The letters were massive, crude, and their hostile intent was entirely clear even in the darkness. I dialed 911 immediately. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is actively destroying my property, I said clearly. I'm at 42 Maple Avenue. The suspect is Jason Caldwell. He is highly intoxicated and armed with a baseball bat. Sir, are you in immediate danger? I am indoors, and all entrances are fully locked. He is outside destroying my mailbox and defacing my garage. Officers are en route to your location now, sir. Please remain inside the house and stay on the line. Across the street, the bedroom light flickered on at Karen Phillips' house. I could see her silhouette in the window, a phone pressed tightly to her ear. Perfect. Multiple witnesses, multiple calls to emergency services. The more documentation, the better. Jason had dropped the spray paint. He went back to his truck and retrieved a crowbar. By 2:20 a.m., he was at my front door, attempting to wedge the metal bar between the door and the frame. The new high-security deadbolt held perfectly firm. Tony Valdez had done an incredible job. I cracked the upstairs window open by 6 inches, letting the cool October air rush into the room. Jason, I called down. My voice was level and clear, loud enough for him to hear, but entirely controlled. The police are on their way. Leave now while you still have the chance to walk away. He snapped his head up, locating me in the window frame. His face was completely flushed, sweating despite the midnight chill and twisted into an expression of pure animosity. You ruined my life, he shouted, pointing the crowbar toward me like a weapon. I'm going to ruin yours. Do you hear me, you old bastard? I'm going to make you pay for this. The sound of sirens drifted over the neighborhood, distant but approaching rapidly. Jason heard them too. The rage on his face instantly shifted into panic. He dropped the crowbar and stumbled back toward his truck, but he was far too intoxicated to move in a straight line. His foot caught the edge of the concrete curb. He fell heavily to the ground, throwing his hands out to break the impact, and by the time he scrambled back up onto his hands and knees, flashing red and blue lights were already washing over the entire street. It was exactly 2:26 a.m. Two patrol cars pulled up to the curb. Officer Reynolds and Officer Davis. That made 3 times they had been dispatched to my address in a single week. Jason was still trying to reach his truck when the headlights caught him. He froze like an animal caught in a high beam, then tried to keep moving. He barely took 2 steps before Reynolds was out of his cruiser, his hand resting firmly on his holster. Jason Caldwell, step away from the vehicle and freeze right there. Keep your hands where I can see them. Jason turned around, stumbling slightly as he braced himself against the hood of his truck. He deserved it. You guys don't understand. He threw us out. The old bastard took everything from us. Get down on the ground. Right now. You guys should be arresting him. He's the criminal. Get on the ground. Officer Davis was already moving in from the side, cuffs out. Seeing him close the distance, Jason panicked and tried to run. He didn't make it 3 feet before his legs buckled, sending him crashing face first onto the pavement again. This time, he wasn't fast enough to get back up. Davis pinned him down, pulling his arms roughly behind his back as the heavy steel clicked tightly around his wrists. You're gonna regret this, Jason screamed, spitting wildly, his cheek pressed flat against the asphalt of my driveway. Do you hear me, you old bastard? You're gonna pay for this. Officer Reynolds walked up to the porch where I had stepped outside. My phone was still raised, capturing every single second. Mr. Brennan, I am incredibly sorry you have to deal with this tonight, he said, looking past me at the shattered living room window, the splintered mailbox, and the freshly defaced garage door. We're going to need to photograph all of this property damage for the official report. I have the whole thing on video, I said, holding up my screen. I've been recording since 2:16 a.m. It caught everything. Reynolds nodded slowly, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. That is huge, sir. We're looking at felony vandalism, criminal trespass, public intoxication, and disorderly conduct. Given that your attorney already filed the emergency restraining order, this video is going to carry immense weight with the judge. He's looking at an automatic 48-hour hold. Minimum. Behind him, Davis hoisted Jason to his feet, forcefully guiding him toward the back of the cruiser. Jason could barely find his footing. His face was badly scraped from the fall, his expensive shirt torn and covered in dirt. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, high-rolling real estate agent who had strutted into my home 18 months ago. He looked utterly pathetic. Mr. Brennan, Reynolds said quietly, lowering his voice. This is a serious escalation. You did the exact right thing by staying inside, calling us immediately, and documenting the facts. But when individuals like this start destroying property, it's often a sign that their behavior could escalate into something far worse. I know, I replied. I knew it all too well. Covering the crime beat for 42 years teaches you exactly how these toxic patterns play out. That's why I need that protective order finalized. Understood. We'll make sure the prosecutor sees this footage first thing in the morning. Reynolds walked back down the driveway to his car. I stood on the porch, watching, as they shut Jason in the back seat, where he continued to scream and slam his fists against the plexiglass window, though his voice was completely muffled now. The street finally settled back into a quiet calm. Across the way, Karen Phillips' bedroom light was still on. I gave her a reassuring wave to let her know I was safe. She waved back before drawing her curtains shut, and that's when I saw it. Half a block down, parked directly in the dark shadow between 2 streetlights. It was Kingsley's sedan, its engine cut, its headlights completely dark. She had been sitting there the entire time, watching it all unfold. She hadn't stepped out of the car to stop him. She hadn't screamed at him to pull himself together. She hadn't approached the officers to make excuses or offer an apology. She had just sat there, a silent observer to the wreckage. I stared at the vehicle for a long moment. I couldn't see her through the dark windshield from that distance, but I knew she was behind the wheel. I knew she had witnessed every single second of his self-destruction. Finally, the taillights flickered on, the engine purred to life, and she slowly drove away, turning the corner until she vanished into the night. By 3:15 a.m., I was completely alone again. I walked the perimeter of my front yard, objectively assessing the physical toll. The living room window would need a glass company out first thing tomorrow. The mailbox was complete kindling. The ceramic planters were entirely unsalvageable. The garage door would require a professional power wash and a fresh coat of paint. It was all quantifiable damage. It was all stuff that could be fixed with money and labor. But the other kind of damage, the profound weight of knowing your daughter sat down the block, silently watching her husband destroy your property and get hauled away in handcuffs. That was something you couldn't put a price tag on. I walked back inside, locked the door securely, and sat down to write out a repair list, because that's what you do. You document the facts. You fix what can be put back together, and you pray the rest heals with time. I spent my Saturday morning cleaning up the aftermath. I swept the glittering glass shards off the walkway, scrubbed the heavy paint off the garage door until most of it faded away, and ran to the hardware store to put up a temporary mailbox. By noon, the physical evidence of Jason's rage was mostly gone. You had to look closely to spot the faint scars on the wood, but the emotional wounds, those remained fresh, deep, and raw. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Charles Norton, and before he even uttered a word, the heavy tone of his voice signaled bad news. "Joe." "Hey, Charlie, what's going on?" A long pause followed. The exact kind of hesitation a lawyer uses when they are trying to carefully measure their words. "I honestly don't know how to tell you this, old friend. Just give it to me straight. Your daughter went down to the precinct this morning. She posted his bail. $5,000. I sat down hard on the nearest kitchen chair. I hadn't even realized I was standing until my legs completely gave out beneath me. She bailed him out. Yes, Joe. She did. After everything he did last night, the vandalism, the explicit threats, the arrest? Yes. I stared down at the coffee mug in my hand. It was Catherine's favorite. A handmade piece with faded yellow sunflowers she had picked up at a Wisconsin craft fair back in 2006. Ever since she passed, I used it every single morning. I couldn't explain why. It just felt like a necessary ritual. "Joe, I tried calling her personally," Charles continued, his voice tight. "I wanted to warn her about the active protective orders we're filing and the severe criminal charges he's facing. She won't take my calls. She won't take mine either, Charlie. I am so sorry, Joe. Don't be." I set the mug down on the counter. It's her choice. I can't save someone who is actively choosing to stay in a destructive situation. You're being incredibly rational about this. Rational? I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Charlie, I'm 67 years old, and I just watched my daughter bail out the man who smashed up my home 12 hours ago. I don't feel rational. I feel like I am completely losing her. For right now, maybe, Charles said gently. But people have to hit their own rock bottom before they can see the unvarnished truth. Give her time, Joe. How much time does she have left? Until he stops destroying mailboxes and turns that rage directly on her. Charles didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. After we hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for 20 minutes. I just stared at Catherine's mug, wondering how on earth Kingsley had scraped together $5,000 to free the man who had dragged her down into a weekly rental at Oak Towers. Money she came up with, while pulling grueling 12-hour nursing shifts, while he spent his afternoons drinking himself into a stupor. Once again, she had chosen him over her own father. At 3:30 p.m., I picked up my phone and did the one thing I had been actively avoiding since Monday night. I called my daughter. It rang 4 times, long, agonizing rings that had me preparing a voicemail script in my head. Then, the line clicked open. "What do you want, Joe?" Her voice was ice-cold and entirely defensive. She didn't sound like the girl who used to call my office just to say hi, or the daughter who laughed at my terrible jokes and asked me to help her study for her nursing exams. "Kingsley, I just want you to be safe. I want you to leave him and come back home." "Home?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You threw us out, Dad. You dumped our entire lives on the porch and humiliated us in front of the neighbors. I removed him from my property, Kingsley. You are the one who chose to walk out that door with him. He is my husband. He stole $47,000 from me. He manufactured a plot to put me in an institution so he could liquidate my home. He came to my house at 2 in the morning, completely intoxicated with a weapon to destroy my property. Kingsley, the man is incredibly dangerous. He made a mistake, Dad. Everyone makes mistakes. People deserve a second chance." I closed my eyes, listening to the exhausting script. Over 42 years of interviewing victims who protected their abusers, I had heard those exact rationalizations word for word. "Sweetheart, this isn't a mistake. This is a deliberate pattern of behavior. Last night, he was drunk and he was hurting." Her voice shot up, cracking with emotion. "You destroyed his life, Dad. You stripped away his dignity. What did you expect him to do?" "I expected him to respect the law, and I expected you to see the reality of who he is." "You don't know him like I do," she said, breaking down into heavy tears. Even though she tried to mask it, I could hear her sobbing. "He is under so much pressure right now. The financial issues, the legal threats, all of it. You caused this, Dad. You started this entire thing. The financial issues were caused by him forging my name on my credit cards and stealing from me for 6 straight months." A heavy silence fell over the line. Then she whispered, It's complicated. You don't understand." "Then help me understand, Kingsley. Come over and talk to me. Just you. No, Jason. Let's sit down and talk through this." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because he needs me right now. We're going to be fine. We just need time to work through this. Please, Dad. Just leave us alone." "Kingsley. Wait." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, staring at her name fading from the screen. Kingsley. The gap-toothed 5-year-old who used to believe her dad could fix any problem in the world, had completely transformed into a 38-year-old woman, bailing out a man who actively threatened our safety. "He's just under pressure. It's complicated. You caused this. He needs me." Every single phrase was a classic warning sign. Every excuse was a glaring red flag. She was shielding him, taking responsibility for his crimes, his rage, and his destruction. She was actively protecting her own abuser, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. I spent 42 years as a journalist learning how to uncover the truth, document facts, and build bulletproof cases to expose corruption and hold bad actors accountable. I had taken down politicians, powerful executives, and criminals who thought they were entirely untouchable. Yet, I was completely powerless to save my own daughter from this destructive path she was actively choosing. Because she didn't want to be saved. She wanted to save him. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, next to Catherine's mug. Outside, the Saturday afternoon began to soften into twilight. The street was quiet, peaceful, completely normal. Families were returning home from weekend errands. Karen Phillips was watering her lawn, and Arthur Coleman was walking his dog down the sidewalk. From the outside, my life looked entirely normal too. The window was repaired. The damage was cleared away. The legal system was moving forward. But, inside, I was forced to watch my daughter choose loyalty to a fraud over the father who raised her, choose compliance with an abuser over her own safety and home. And the absolute worst part was, I understood exactly why. Because she loved him. Because she had taken vows. Because admitting he was dangerous meant admitting she had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Because leaving felt like total failure. Because she genuinely believed that, with enough love and effort, she could fix him and mold him back into the man she thought she married. Those are the exact psychological traps that keep people locked in, situations that slowly destroy them. I understood them completely. I had interviewed hundreds of people who said the exact same things, made the identical choices, and rationalized the same unforgivable actions. But understanding it didn't lessen the pain by a single fraction. At 4 p.m., I got up from the kitchen table, walked into the living room, and sat down in Catherine's armchair, the exact spot where I had sat on Monday evening, waiting for them to discover that their keys no longer worked. 4 days ago felt like a lifetime. My phone sat completely silent on the coffee table. There was no callback from Kingsley, no apology, no text saying, "You're right, Dad. I'm walking away." There was only silence, and I sat there in my quiet house, knowing I had handled every single legal and practical step perfectly, yet I had still lost my daughter. You cannot force a person to open their eyes to the truth. You can display the hard evidence. You can document the facts. You can offer a sanctuary of safety, unconditional support, and love. But ultimately, you cannot force them to choose it. That choice belongs to them alone. By Tuesday night, 3 full days had passed since Kingsley hung up on me. 3 days of total silence that felt like 3 long years. I had just settled into Catherine's armchair with a historical biography, a book about World War II, a fitting choice given the quiet conflict playing out within my own family. At exactly 9:07 p.m., my phone screen lit up. The caller ID read, "Kingsley." My heart completely stopped before my hand even reached the device. "Kingsley? Dad." Her voice was a faint, trembling whisper, completely laced with absolute terror. "Please help me, please." Before she could even finish the sentence, I was on my feet, the heavy book dropping forgotten to the floor. "Where are you?" "Stay on the line. I'm coming right now." In the background, I heard it. A voice. Male. Raging. I couldn't make out the specific words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was pure, unbridled fury, the kind of explosive anger that completely defies reason. We? We got into an argument about the finances. About you. He got so incredibly angry, Dad. I can't. A loud, heavy thud echoed through the line. The sound of something massive impacting a wall. God, please don't let it be a person. Let it just be a physical venting of rage against structure. I'm locked in the bathroom, she sobbed, her breath catching. The door is secured, but he's trying to. Kingsley! Jason's voice cut through the background with terrifying clarity. It was muffled by the bathroom door, but close enough for the phone's microphone to capture the sheer volume. Open this damn door. We are not finished talking. I was already moving, snatching my truck keys and wallet from the kitchen counter while keeping the phone pressed tightly to my ear. Sweetheart, listen to me. Give me the exact address. I need the address right now. 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B. But Dad, please don't come here. He's too angry. I don't want you to get. The sound of the door, rattling violently in its frame, cut her off, followed by heavy, rhythmic blows against the wood. I'm going to be there in 3 minutes. Keep that door locked. Do you hear me? Do not open it. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the keys as I bolted toward the garage. Dad, her voice completely broke, dissolving into sheer desperation. He put his hands on me earlier tonight. It isn't terrible, but I should have listened to you. You were right. You were right about everything. Those words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. She had known. A part of her had known 3 days ago when she bailed him out of jail. She had known when she told me to leave them alone, but she stayed anyway because that's exactly how the cycle of control works. It makes you believe that maybe you're the problem, that things will get better if you just try a little harder. I'm backing out of the garage right now. The second we hang up, I'm calling 911. Hold on, Kingsley. The truck engine roared to life as I threw it into reverse. I'm so scared, Dad. I'm so scared. I know, baby. I know, but I'm on my way. 2 minutes. Just hold on for 2 minutes. Another massive crash echoed through the phone, much louder this time. The sound of shifting wood. Jason's voice had devolved into completely incoherent shouts, his words melting into a raw roar of anger. And then came a sound that turned my blood to absolute ice. The sharp, distinct crack of splintering wood. The doorframe was giving way under the continuous impact. Oh no. Oh my God. He's Kingsley! Hold the door. I'm right down the block. A sharp, piercing scream tore through the line, cut off abruptly in midair. No, please, don't. The call disconnected. It was 9:09 p.m. I was already tearing down Oak Street, blowing past every single red light between my house and her location. My free hand frantically dialing 911. It rang once, twice. 911, what is your emergency? My daughter, Kingsley Brennan, is at 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B. Her husband is actively breaking through a locked bathroom door where she's hiding. I just heard the door give way, she screamed, and the line went completely dead. I am exactly 2 blocks away. Sir, dispatching officers to that location immediately. Please do not enter the apartment yourself. Wait for. I'm her father. I'm not waiting. I slammed the phone down on the passenger seat, threw the truck into park outside the building, and left the engine running, the door wide open with the keys still in the ignition. I hit the brakes hard, sliding into the curb outside 1247 Oak Street at precisely 9:19 p.m. The building loomed ahead in the darkness. A rundown 4-story brick structure with flickering exterior security lights. It was the exact kind of place where hope goes to break under the sheer weight of terrible choices and worse circumstances. Third floor. Apartment 3B. I bolted for the entrance. There was no security guard, no intercom system, no locked main door. I shoved it open and burst inside. The stairwell reeked of stale cigarette smoke, a heavy damp musk that felt like decades of neglect. I took the stairs two at a time, my lungs burning, my legs screaming under the sudden strain. A 67-year-old man, moving with the explosive urgency of a 25-year-old, because my daughter was in danger, and absolutely nothing else mattered. Reaching the third-floor hallway, the flickering overhead lights cast long shadows over the weathered apartment doors. At the far end of the corridor, a woman stood outside. Apartment 3, both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Seeing me charge down the hall, she took a hesitant step forward. She was in her late 50s, wearing a faded bathrobe, fear etched clearly into her face. Are you her father?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes." "Thank goodness," she gasped, her hands shaking. I heard such terrible noises inside. Screaming, things breaking. I let her use my phone to make a call. Is she going to be okay?" "Call 911 again," I barked as I blew right past her without looking back. "Tell them to get units here right now." Apartment 3B. The door was shut, but I could hear distinct movement inside. Heavy footsteps and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I hammered my fist against the wood with everything I had. "Kingsley, it's Dad. Open the door." The footsteps stopped instantly. An absolute silence hung in the hallway for 3 long heartbeats. Then the door swung inward. Jason Caldwell stood at the threshold, his hair completely disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and his shirt half untucked from his waist. He was actively trying to force his features into a calm, regular expression. But the mask failed entirely. "Joe," he said, using my name as if we were just 2 neighbors casually bumping into each other at the local market. "What are you doing here? Where is she?" He didn't move an inch. He didn't step aside. He just stood there, physically blocking the doorway, one hand gripping the frame as if he held absolute authority over the space. "She's fine, Joe. We just had a slight disagreement. Married couples argue sometimes. This is a private matter between my wife and me. You need to leave." I looked right past his shoulder into the unit. The place looked like an absolute disaster zone. A lamp lay shattered across the linoleum floor. A chair was overturned. And in the far corner, right against the splintered frame of the bathroom door, my daughter sat curled on the floor. Her knees were pulled tightly against her chest, her face buried in her arms as her shoulders shook with violent sobs. "Kingsley." She lifted her head, her face completely streaked with tears, swollen and bruised. And in her eyes, God in her eyes, I saw a level of fear that no child should ever experience. "Sweetheart, get up. Come to Dad." She started to shift, pushing herself up from the floor. Jason immediately took a sharp step to the side, completely cutting off the physical path between her and the exit. "She isn't going anywhere, Joe. This is a private residence. You're trespassing, and you need to get out before I call the police myself." A cold, absolute calm settled deep inside my chest. It wasn't rage. It was something far colder than anger. It was the quiet stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. "You have exactly 5 seconds to step away from my daughter." "Or what, old man?" he sneered, letting out a sharp laugh. "You gonna hit me? You're 67 years old. You really think? I shoved past him with everything I had. It wasn't a wild punch or a theatrical blow, just a relentless forward surge. The kind of physical momentum that states, with absolute certainty, "You cannot stop me." He grabbed my arm, attempting to wrench me back toward the threshold. For a brief second, we locked up in the doorway, him straining to reassert control, me pushing past him to get to my child. Adrenaline is a powerful thing. It makes 67-year-old muscles remember exactly what they used to be capable of. I tore my arm free from his grip and stepped firmly into the apartment. "Don't you touch me." Behind us, the sound of sirens cut through the night, incredibly close and growing louder by the second. Heavy, professional footsteps began pounding up the stairwell in rapid succession. Officer Reynolds burst through the doorway, with Officer Davis trailing right behind him. Reynolds kept his hand resting near his duty belt about, his eyes scanning the room to immediately assess the scene. "Nobody move. Step back." Jason's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The aggressive posture vanished, replaced by a look of complete injured innocence, so rapidly it would have been impressive. Impressive, if it weren't so entirely sickening. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, gesturing wildly toward me. "This man just forced his way into my home. He assaulted me. He's been harassing us for weeks, and there's an active restraining order application process. Ask her." I kept my eyes locked entirely on Kingsley. "Ask my daughter what happened here tonight." Reynolds looked at Jason, glanced at me, and finally focused on Kingsley, who remained curled in the corner. He walked past both of us, dropping down to one knee to meet her eye to level. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds. Are you all right? Do you need us to call paramedics out here?" Kingsley's voice was tiny, shaking with emotion. I called my dad. Jason and we got into an argument about the money, about everything, and they got completely out of hand." "Did he assault you, ma'am?" The question hung in the quiet room. Simple, direct, and entirely unavoidable. Kingsley looked at Jason, then turned her eyes to me, and finally looked back at Reynolds. She gave a single nod, slight but definitive. "Yes." Reynolds stood up, looked over at Davis, and gave a sharp nod. "Cuff him." "What?" Jason's voice shot up several octaves. "She's lying. She's confused." She tripped and fell on her own. "This is a domestic misunderstanding. It's a family issue. You can't do this." Davis was already moving, pulling the steel cuffs from his belt. "Jason Caldwell, you're under arrest for domestic battery and assault." Reynolds closed the distance to Jason, his voice hard and unyielding. "Sir, you are also in direct violation of a protective order. You were formally barred from having any contact with Joseph Brennan, yet you are actively engaging with him on this scene. He came here. He broke in. This is..." "Save it for the judge. Get him out of here, Davis." They grabbed Jason by the arms and guided him toward the exit. He continued to shout and protest, his slurred voice echoing down the escorted him down, grumbling about his rights, shouting that we would all regret this, and yelling that Kingsley would come crawling back to him. The noise gradually faded away into the lower floors. The apartment fell completely quiet. I walked across the linoleum floor to where my daughter was sitting. My 67-year-old knees protested, but I dropped down to the floor anyway, bringing myself level with her. "Kingsley!" She looked up at me, and at 38, she looked exactly like she did when she was 5 years old, sitting on the pavement after scraping her knee off her bicycle. Frightened, hurting, and needing to know that things were going to be okay. Sweetheart, it's over. You're completely safe now. And with that, she broke. The emotional walls she had tried to maintain for days, perhaps months, came crashing down entirely. She leaned forward into my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. A deep, visceral cry that came from the absolute depths of her soul. I held her tightly, letting her let it all out. I didn't say a single word, because what was there left to say? I told you so didn't matter anymore. And you should have listened wasn't going to fix a thing. She knew the truth now. God, she knew it better than anyone. Behind us, I heard more footsteps ascending the stairs, the heavier tread of emergency medical technicians carrying their gear. Paramedics are outside, Mr. Brennan, Reynolds said softly from the doorway. They need to evaluate her and check her over. I nodded, but I didn't let go just yet. Not until Kingsley was ready. Finally, she pulled back slightly, wiping her face with a trembling hand. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so incredibly sorry. You were right about everything, and I still chose him. I was so stupid. Hey, I said gently, cupping her face in my hands so she had to look me in the eye. You are not stupid. You're human, and you are my daughter. That is more than enough. The medical team stepped into the room with their equipment, speaking in those calm, practiced, professional tones. Reynolds approached me, keeping his voice low. Mr. Brennan, we're going to need formal statements from both of you, but that can wait until tomorrow morning. Right now, let's just make sure your daughter gets the care she needs. I stood up slowly, every single joint aching from the physical strain. I watched as the EMTs systematically evaluated Kingsley, asking quiet questions and documenting any physical marks. In the hallway, Mrs. Cooper, the neighbor who had called, stood wringing her hands anxiously. She caught my eye and offered a supportive nod, the quiet understanding between people that says, "You did what had to be done." In the distance, I could still hear the faint sound of Jason's voice from the street below, still shouting, still claiming the entire thing was a massive misunderstanding. But up here in apartment 3B, my daughter was safe, and that was the only that mattered. 4 months later, only fact that mattered. My house sounds completely different. It isn't filled with that silence of endurance, nor is it loud with conflict. It echoes with the sound of genuine conversation. On a Wednesday. It's 3 p.m. There are 12 people sitting in my living room on borrowed folding chairs, sharing coffee and personal stories. Yes. Barbara Peterson is here, along with Arthur Coleman and Evelyn Blake, Harold and others whose immense courage I have the privilege of witnessing every single week. Yes. We call ourselves the Wednesday Support Circle. Today, our discussion focuses on the early warning signs of financial exploitation. Those small, seemingly innocent actions that are so easy to overlook. Someone offering to manage your bills out of nowhere. An individual becoming intensely defensive over bank statements. The exact signs I had missed myself. The hardest part, Evelyn explained to the group, is admitting that your own flesh and blood could systematically take advantage of you. Your mind just fights against seeing the reality of the situation. Heads nodded in unison around the room. We all understood that pain intimately. It was the exact bond that brought us together in this space. By 4:30 p.m., the meeting wrapped up. Barbara lingered by my chair as the others began to leave. Joe, you've managed to turn your personal ordeal into real mission for people. We all do it, Barb. That's exactly what a community is for. The house cleared out, leaving behind a quiet that no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like pure peace. 4 months. Let me map out exactly what that timeline looked like. On October 29th, I removed Kingsley from that apartment after Reynolds arrested Jason for domestic battery. She sat in the passenger seat of my truck and told me, "You were right about everything, Dad." She spent her first night back in her childhood bedroom, while I stayed awake downstairs, listening to the quiet house to ensure her safety. In November, the healing process officially began. We connected with Dr. Sanders for weekly therapy sessions, and I joined her for family counseling. I learned truths that I suppose I had always known deep down. Individuals stay in destructive dynamics, not out of stupidity, but because abusers methodically convince them that they are the sole cause of the problem. Jason tried to break contact via phone several times, but Charles Norton successfully secured a permanent protective order. By December, the legal system ran its course. Jason accepted a plea agreement. 18 months in the county jail, followed by 5 years of strict probation and mandatory behavioral counseling. His defense attorney undoubtedly explained that the video evidence of the property destruction, the audio recording of him breaking through the bathroom door, and the explicit testimony of the responding officers meant a trial would result in a guaranteed maximum sentence. When Charles called to deliver the news, I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. And my daughter? She's still in her old room upstairs. She went back to work at the hospital 3 months ago, pulling those long nursing shifts again. But now when she comes home, the defensive look in her eyes is completely gone. Yesterday, we made pancakes together for breakfast, using Catherine's old recipe. We didn't talk about Jason, the credit cards, or the night at Oak Towers. We just talked about the weather, her upcoming shift, and how the autumn leaves were finally starting to clear from the yard. And as she reached across the counter to pass me the syrup, she gave me that exact gap-toothed smile from the county fair photo. The process of rebuilding a life takes time, documentation, and immense patience. You have to clean up the shattered glass, scrub away the defacement, and replace the broken locks. But eventually, if you stand your ground and anchor yourself to the facts, the structure becomes steady again. The boundaries hold, the safety returns, and the home officially becomes your own once more.